Good morning, folks. I am super busy right now, but I really want to get this project going now that the weather's warm. So I'm going to take a little bit of time this morning to get this started and make a video on these propagation experiments. This started with the idea that I could split a cactus like this and that it would think that each of the ribs is like a separate cactus, and it would do this, which is sprout pups. So you can see on this one, it sprouted like similar sized pups, on all those points. On that one, I left the tip, like the whole tip, and on some others, like this one, and that one, and this one, I cut the tips off. I just thought they might be kind of awkward, and I wanted to try rooting the chips. This is all about propagation. So let's say that I get a new seedling, like let's say this seedling's pretty cool here, right? And I get it to a certain size, maybe it pups out and the pups look good too, it's got like a form I want, it undergoes further testing, and I'm like, yeah, that thing's great in all respects, so let's propagate it. So there are certain scenarios where I might want to create a whole bunch of these or create a bunch quickly. So this is about getting a small amount of propagation material into a large number of individual plants quickly. So my first thought was, yeah, if I cut them like this, then the plant will think that each of these is its own cactus and needs to grow its own point. And so far, like some of them have, some of them haven't. This one here grew 4 points, but one of them stalled out, and then two of them just didn't grow. So I don't really know, but in doing that, I had already started experimenting with just taking small chips, like say if I cut this cactus all up and cut right here and made like a chip every like 2 aerials, and then try to root those. When I cut them, they dried out. You can imagine why, because there's all this like cut surface, like both ends here are cut, and then this whole, all this here, and so of course they're going to tend to dehydrate. So when I did this experiment, I realized, oh, well, now I've made most of those cuts, but since it's getting water from the stalk still, they're still plump, and they calloused and completely healed up here. Okay, well, let's do that, and then I can harvest these chips. And they're not going to lose as much water because, like on this one, there would only be these 2 cut ends. And then I thought, okay, well, let's just take that one step further, cut it like this, cut these most of the way through, like, say, through the green part here. Let everything heal on the plant, and then harvest the chips, and then you're only leaving, like, 2 small areas on each chip that have to dry still and callus, and then callus that for another month, and then try to root those. That's the next phase of this experiment. So what are our other options? Let's say I want a whole bunch of cactus. Our other options are grafting, right? The advantage to grafting is I get a plant that's already established, it's got roots, it's got a bunch of energy, and it can grow a big pup pretty fast. Everyone who's grafted a lot knows how big of a pup you can get in 1 year off an established cactus, like on a big plant especially. So that's cool, but then you need all this stock, right? Like these are all for grafting, and these are pretty small stalks, so they're only going to grow so big. It's cool, it's useful, and it may be something to use in combination, right? So let's say I have this cactus here. It grows most of the rest of this year. It gets, chopped. I'm like, okay, it's a go. Then I'm still only going to have a pretty small amount of propagation material. And that's a point at which I might be like, okay, let's graft what I have and grow, maybe get, several successful grafts, let them grow pretty good chunks of cactus, and then go to something like this where I can get a whole bunch quickly. The other thing people bring up a lot is tissue culture. Well, I live in the mountains. I have no extra space at all. I have them on solar, so I can't control like temperature. I can't do lights really. Not really an option for me. Plus, I'm not like into that kind of like super techy stuff, like that takes a lot of measuring and sanitizing and being careful and all that stuff. And then you're still starting with this tiny thing that's going to take a long time to get to something sizable. So I think this is a really good experiment to see how this goes. Let's talk about rooting these chips. So we can go up in a minute and look at this other tray I have. But here's some King Tubby chips that eventually rooted, but they took a really, really long time. Originally, I'd laid them completely flat. Like this one's not even completely flat, but closer to that, like horizontal. And the advantage, like one of the factors in this is how much green is showing, because the plant needs green surface to photosynthesize. That's like the leaf equivalent of a leaf of the plant to make energy, right? You want that exposed. And I had planted a few of these upright, but most of them were like laying flat and they just weren't rooting. And then one day I was like, well, maybe they can root from like the underside here, which would be the core of the cactus or whatever, but they do seem to tend to want to root from the bottom of the cut. So I tipped them like this so that most of the green was, this is a good example here, most of the green was still showing, but the base was buried, and then they popped roots really fast. Yeah, so let's go look at the other tray and I'll explain more about that. Here are a bunch of failed graft chips over here. I did make some cuts that were like pieces I just cut fresh like this on purpose. Some of those might be these, but a lot of those died, so I don't really know. But these have been laying just flat, like this one, all winter, and they just were not rooting. So I actually went and planted all those upright too, because I just thought maybe they'll root faster. So this one's not rooted yet. That's a Jules Giant. I also noticed that like I had a bunch of these Hutchinson 6212 and a bunch of Sunburst, and the Sunburst, oh, that's a root right there. The Sunburst rooted much quicker. Yeah, these are just hesitant to root, so that's another factor there. I think they do have a better chance planting like this. These are all tips, but the things I'm going to be cutting are like this, except they have the whole center of the core, that like triangle, which is, I think, much better. So I might try like willow tea. People talk about that. And it would be real easy to do an A/B test, like, you know, half the flat soaked in willow tea overnight, or even rooted in willow tea, you know, because you can root these things in water. I've rooted cactus cuts in water, but I've had real mixed results. Some pop roots right away, some just sit there. So, you know, it's not magic or anything. But people talk about willow tea having these hormones that cause rooting because it roots really easy. So that's an easy experiment to do. But I have a feeling that as long as the cactus isn't super hard to root, that this whole plan is going to work. By the way, here are the new cactus flats that are up and coming. They're growing quite fast now. And it'll probably be like early summer, I would think, when they're ready to start listing. Okay, so I clean this knife with alcohol, and then I use a lot of peroxide. If you could find like a little mist bottle like this. The first thing I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to harvest all these Jules Giant tips or ribs, and I'm just going to cut them into like sections with like 2 aerials each. I want to get some of these healed and calloused as soon as possible so that I can test rooting them. Because I'm trying to test like different parts of this now that I have some of this stuff started already. Because this fall, I may invest really heavily in this technique. The timing that I'm thinking will be in like late summer or early fall. I split cactus, maybe do these cuts like I talked about a month later when everything's calloused really well. Harvest all those chips, which will have only, again, like a small cut area to heal left because most of it's already been cut and healed. So I'm callousing and rooting those over the fall and winter, you know, possibly like indoors or something. Like I could take a tray of stuff to a friend's house where I could have lights and heat mats and stuff if I needed. You know, if you use light and everything, then you could have them growing already, hopefully by, if all this works, by spring. Even if not, like even in my primitive conditions without lights and heat, I can probably get those rooted and ready to grow by spring. Then they pop out, then they have like the rest of the spring and summer to grow. And I'm hoping with it, it'll be about like maybe 14 months or so to get a plant that's between 6 and 10 inches tall. Let's count here. So let's say that I split this all the way to here. This is Jules Giant. So we'll draw a line there. 1, 2, 3, basically like 9. So let's just go another one down. So we'll say there's 10 times 6. This is actually 7 ribs, but let's say an average of 6 ribs. If they all took, which, let's say they don't, and there's a percentage of loss, we're looking at maybe like 50 or more plants. To like a well-rooted, healthy, like ready to rock pup with roots in 14 months. Once you get the ball rolling, like, so let's say I have a bunch of, this was a new cactus and I made like, 3 or 4 grafts that were successful on big plants, and they grow pretty chunky and I get to cut those. The numbers add up pretty quick. So again, like, you might be like, well, why do you need so many? Well, I don't know. Maybe someone wants to plant a large amount of the same cactus, like King Tubby. Maybe a nursery is like, wow, that Stubbs, look at Stubbs. Stubbs is super cool, just as an ornamental plant. Very cool. Yeah, I'd buy, 500 of those. Okay, it's nursery work, right? It's just nursery work. For whatever reasons you'd want to do it. But I'm going to harvest this a little bit on the low side. So, once again, just hit that with a little bit of that, and here we go. So look at this. I mean, this isn't just dry. This is like, healthy, well-established callus tissue. Well, yeah, these are really neat. Wow. So something like that. Okay. So these are healthy chunks of cactus. I mean, this one's small, but they're fairly big pieces of cactus. Again, the green part's real important, so I may be able to get away with a smaller chip, but this is going to give a balance between efficient use of material and having enough green surface. Like, that one's pretty small, but okay. And then the other thing I'm going to do with all of these, again, is just hit the surfaces with peroxide. Okay, now what we're going to try today is imagine if this cut was already made, right? All of these cuts. Probably just through the part of the rib that's showing, right? So the green part. That's all made, and these open up and they dry out and heal. And then we're only cutting like these 2 small sections, and these are going to lose very little water. So it'd be more like that's how much cut would be showing on each end. So that's really the next experiment. Today I'm going to go ahead and cut these up, and then we'll go do that. So this one is at the base, so it ended up with all kinds of cut surface. So we'll see how that does. But again, I've tried that before. It didn't work out too great. I think I'm going to cut this Yogi cactus, and I think people will want them, so it's okay to propagate a bunch of it. I don't want to invest in doing like a really good cactus or something that's of high value to me or something yet. So this is a good choice, I think. Okay, this is kind of hard to cut accurately. Usually I really like this big wide knife, but in this case I'm thinking, not that these cuts really need to be super perfect or anything. I'm thinking like a thin knife, more like a fillet knife. The wide blade doesn't want to turn and adjust. I actually think I'm going to go to just cutting a single one at a time, because that's easy, especially now that initial cut is made. And with a 5-sided cactus, you have to do this anyway, or with a 7. I'm going to start cutting these. I'm going to cut some of them this way, and then some I'm going to leave. So what do you guys think? Is this just going to die? Is it going to heal? Is it going to rot? What's it going to do? I'm cutting all the way through the skin into the pulp, and I'm kind of starting to think maybe I shouldn't be doing that. And I might just leave like a little bit of the skin attached right up to there, but leave just a little piece of the skin intact. It kind of feels like they might break, but nothing's broken so far. And I'm going to go get a rubber band and just sort of make sure that this stays the point where it's not just going to break, because those are pretty wobbly. But what I've seen in the past is that like these, everything kind of opens up as it dries a little bit, and then air can get down in there and heal these things. And I'm hoping that these cuts that I made, I'm pretty much counting on it, will open up a little bit so they can dry out. That I can kind of move these around a little bit and get them to stay where I want, because they're tending, like these two are sticking together, so I want to be able to like, yeah, there we go. Kind of fix those apart a little bit. All right, so I'm just going to leave it and find out what happens. So with these cuts here, they look pretty risky, you know, unless they dry and open up, which I'm kind of counting on them doing. Yeah, that seems a little risky. So what we're going to do next is take one of these cactus that I already cut and make cuts, and then let those heal in the plant. So it would be done in 2 stages. So this is trying to do it in 1 stage. We're going to try to do it in 2 stages too. Alcoholed again. Peroxide it some more. Let's do Hutch. Hutchins 6212. I think it's Hutchinson. So I cut 3 of those ribs. We'll see how those do as well. Okay, next we're going to harvest these guys. This is Scope Clone A. I just wanted more of it, so I thought it'd be a good one to experiment on. And the goal here was, the original idea was that this would happen. Okay, so that's good, that happened. I would cut these off, and then they would do this all over again. So we're going to find out. Now I could either harvest this here, but I think I'm going to harvest it down here. You know, I just have to make a call on each one where it is best to harvest it. But that certainly should be big enough to root. Yeah, it's interesting that the one that popped the best, like according to what I was really trying, I wanted them to do, was the one on which I left the tips intact. Okay, so that's that experiment. We'll see if they grow back, if they all grow back, how many of them grow back. Let's go label these before I forget. This is Hextasy, one of my seedlings. And there are very few of these in the world. Just, I've been trying to build it up. I have some grafts, a few cuttings, rooting. If I'm going to get this out into the world, I need to make a bunch of them. So that's what we're doing. So you can see on this one how I harvested this grafting material off the sides, and it healed up fine. Look, it's growing beautiful columns on top of that. So, you know, I'm still able to leave a tall piece of cactus, get good growth, get this up to flowering size. Okay, and finally, there were these small pieces that I split. This one popped out on 4 out of 5. This one's 2 out of 5. Not great success rate. I think I'm going to go ahead and harvest those guys. So I can already see these opening up. This one looks like it's open all the way to the back. So that means there's air getting in there. So like another thing you could do is put something down inside here and somehow figure out a way to slightly flex each of these so they kind of go out like this. But I'm just going to try this because it's like the simplest solution is like the best solution, right? If it works, let's just leave it and find out what happens. But if it doesn't work, I think really that would be the solution, is just to like slip something down here right about midway that would cause them to slightly bow when you know, rubber band them at the top. So we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 26, 28. 28 joules giant off that one section. I'm just going to let them dry for a while till the surfaces are actually just dry. And then I'll move them somewhere in the shade where they're getting good air circulation and it's like warm, you know, maybe in front of a window inside. In about a month or so, we'll start experimenting with rooting these, hopefully, depending on how busy I am with other stuff. This thing collapsed within about a day. It's a really good thing I had that rubber band on there and that it happened to fall against this cactus. Otherwise, those would have broken off for sure. So it got really floppy from dehydration, and these cuts, remember I was saying how like when I was making these cuts that I thought I was going too far and I shouldn't cut all the way through the green part, and then the ones where I cut way through like this were even worse. So I was right. And it looks like most of them I did actually cut all the way through the green part. It was just kind of hard to control and I wasn't being very careful. So now we have more information. I'm like pretty incautious about these things when I'm experimenting. I used to overthink everything and I'd like lay in bed at night, you know, trying to figure out every possible scenario and how everything was going to go wrong. You know, I'm more interested in like the landscape of a problem, which means, you know, the more I screw up, the better idea I have of what the whole big picture looks like, right? Like how do you correct technical issues until you know what they are? So I also talked about how we could do this in 2 stages by cutting, you know, these first and then making these cuts later, or, you know, do it both at the same time. And on this one, you know, it was already healed up and I just made those cuts right there. We'll go back to that in a second. It's kind of looking like in most cases probably going to be better to do it in 2 stages. My friend came and she saw this and she started messing with trying to fix it. And I was just like, no, just leave it, you know, unless we like both work together and use stakes and all kinds of stuff. It's just, there's just no point. So remember when I cut this Jules Giant, those pieces were absolutely rigid. I mean, they were just like rock solid. And that's what these are going to end up like. Like right now they're really rubbery because they lost a bunch of water. But once this heals, and remember it's not just going to dry, it's going to make like a thick callus tissue over all of this that's going to be very rigid. And so if I can get them to that stage before making these cuts, that seems like it would make more sense. And again, we may not even need to make these cuts on the plant. It's just like an option I want to explore. The other factor here is that, you know, this was Jules Giant. And it wasn't as long. I made this cut on purpose extra long to see what would happen. And this is a much smaller diameter. It's a pretty juicy cut, so it just was going to be more floppy. So who knows what would have happened if I hadn't made these cuts. Maybe it would still be relatively upright, maybe not. You could always use some stakes. I mean, that's not a problem. So there's options there. On this one, I was hoping that these cuts would like open out and almost like these would almost like curve and open. But since this is all attached like at the top, you know, it's not attached, but it's like pressed together at the top, they can't really curl, I don't think. I could see making these cuts a little bit deeper. I'm a little worried that they'll get infected because I didn't, you know, I cut them, but they're not really opening up and drying. Maybe just a little, but not too much. Yeah, I don't really know what to think. They may just heal back together. But yeah, again, it may not be necessary. We could probably just like cut these big ribs, let them callus really well, and then just go ahead and make these cuts. So I just want to keep exploring options though and just do stuff. Fuck around and find out, right? That's the deal. Fuck around and find out. I'm not crazy that, some of these cuts are a little bit closed, that these didn't open up, that it's all crooked, but I'm just going to leave it just like that and let it all callus, and it's going to like stiffen and harden into that exact position right there. Okay, just a couple of quick updates before I publish this video. More updates, second set of updates. So I had shown these chips earlier in the video, stood upright in a flat, because I had figured out that they seem to root much better from the base than they do from the underside here. I was looking through that flat just a few days ago, and I found a couple of these had rooted. Also, a confounding factor for that is that it's springtime. So, can't be totally sure that that's why, but I'm pretty sure it's because they were tipped upright. Now, I moved them into these because I didn't want to keep moving them around, and I'm pretty sure like at least 50% of these are actually going to throw roots now. And I think this is more like what I'll be doing with the chips that I'm making now. This flat fits 36 of these, whatever size this is. This is an Anderson tree band system, extremely efficient. Aside from this rim here, there's really no wasted space. And yeah, so the idea would be to make those nice chips, put them in here and forget about them for the next whatever, how many months, until they're hopefully again like 6 to 10 inches tall by the end of that growing season. The reason I tipped these is, well, I still want the base buried, and so this buries the base, but it still leaves this exposed because it's tilted like a solar panel. So this is facing like east, southeast-ish, and you can see this is just a bunch of little solar panels collecting light and photosynthesizing. Pretty cool. So that's probably what I'll do, and just leave these. If you look at this bench, I think you could probably fit like 7 or 8 across and at least 2 deep of these flats. Whatever that is times 36, it's a bunch of cactus. Yeah, so let's go look at the split cactus, and then we'll type this video. Okay, the split cactus is growing some funk here. Just after the last little update I did on this, we had like 2 or 3 days of damp weather, which, in this greenhouse, like that, this is kind of what I would expect to start happening. Just a little mold, some of this orange, whatever that is. Maybe like that looks like a rotten spot. These are stress blisters, not too much to worry about there. I think it's going to be okay, but either way, totally preventable, right? Even if I'd put just a small fan on it, like during the damp weather, that would help, and that could be part of like a system even. It's not a fundamental problem. It's a problem for this, but I think it's going to work out fine. Like anyone who's rooted a lot of cactus, you pick up your cactus cuttings sometimes, and sometimes it'll look perfectly clean, and other times it'll look like this and much worse, with all manner of like multicolored crap growing on there. And it usually works out fine. I also have like a device in mind for the interior of these that will keep them rigid and standing upright, increase air circulation, and allow these cuts to remain open. That's very, very simple. I could set up to mass produce these things, and anyone could make one at home too. So we'll try that on the next splits. Remember I said how this thing got super floppy, and like you could see it just kind of fell over because it lost so much water out of all these cuts. Well, this is already calloused now to the point where these are really stiffening up. They're much, much stiffer. Like this one's actually quite rigid, and that will only increase. At this point, it's because the water that's coming in from the plant is not just leaving, right? So it's accumulating and stiffening. And then over time, it'll be more because this callus tissue thickens and gets like very rigid. And then these things will be just rock solid. Even these cut ones probably will be quite rigid. I think everything actually looks really encouraging. I think this is going to work the way that I think it will work. The only real questions for me are like, what percentage of them are not going to root? I'm guessing like definitely most of them are going to root. And then the other one is like, how much growth can I get out of them in a year, and what's the timing going to be on that? I think the timing's going to, as I perceive it now, is going to be about right. Like maybe make these cuts in late summer, like August, harvest everything, all the chips and cuts and stuff in September, callus them through October, then plant them and have them hopefully rooted and ready to grow and possibly pupping out by, April the next year. And then getting like a 6 to 10 inch cactus. That's the hope. We'll see. We'll be back to this when there's something to talk about or something to do.